Pumpkin cupcakes with cream cheese icing? Yes, please. Hello and welcome to Jackson's Job, where my special interest is baking. Join me as we learn, make mistakes, and happily bake. The key to any good recipe is to gather up all your ingredients and to double check your measurements. Speaking of which, here at Jackson's Job, we provide both the U.S. standard and metric measurements. The recipes are written using the metric system and then converted to the closest volume measurements, taking into consideration how most beginners will use measuring cups. So there might be a slight variation between the two options. Don't worry though. Each method was tested several times to ensure accuracy and reliability for a successful bake. Let's learn to bake these cupcakes together. Step 1, we are going to prepare our pan and oven. The first thing we're going to need is a muffin tin, and then we want to line it or grease and flour each tin. We are going to set this aside and preheat our oven to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, or that's 160 degrees Celsius. Step 2, we are going to mix together our dry ingredients. For all of my recipes, unless otherwise stated, I use all-purpose or plain flour, and it doesn't matter which brand you use. Next, I'm going to add in some baking powder, and then I'm going to add in some salt, and the salt helps with two things. It enhances flavors, and it also cuts down on the sweetness. Then we are going to use some spices. Personally, I think you should use cinnamon, ginger, and allspice. Now, if you don't have these spices, that's okay. The one that's absolutely necessary is cinnamon or pumpkin pie spice. If you want to use pumpkin pie spice, then I encourage you to use 1.5 teaspoons of that. Don't go any further than that because then it can become a little bit too overpowering. Now when it comes to allspice, you don't have to use it. It's called poor man's nutmeg and cloves because those two spices are pretty expensive. Now if you do want to use nutmeg and cloves, you would substitute that at 1/8 of a teaspoon. That's about 0.25 grams or so. Mix these together briefly with a whisk or a fork and then set this aside. For step 3, we are going to mix our wet ingredients. So for the star of the show, we are going to add in some canned pumpkin or pumpkin puree. Of course, you can use your own if you want to go through the trouble, but the stuff in the can is fine and generics are great for this recipe. To this, we're going to add in some eggs. And yes, I know eggs are expensive these days, but this recipe is worth it. Mix this together briefly until it's well combined. Now you want to add in some vanilla, and this is completely optional. If you don't have vanilla, you can skip it, or you can use imitation. It works great for this recipe. That's what I use personally. The next ingredient is considered a wet ingredient even though it's dry, and that is sugar. We're going to use a mixture of white and brown sugar. If you don't have brown sugar, you can use all white sugar. That's perfectly fine. I'm using the brown sugar for just a little bit of extra flavor there. Then you're going to add in some cooking oil, and you can use any kind of oil you like. I personally like canola oil, number 1, due to allergies, and then number 2, because it doesn't have a flavor. But you can use anything that you want. You can use vegetable oil. You can even use olive oil, but I don't recommend using olive oil to bake with. You're just wasting really expensive oil. Mix this together, and then we are going to add in some milk. Now for the milk, you can use fat-free milk, full-fat milk, soy milk, any kind of milk substitute that you like. The fuller the fat, the richer the flavor. Mix this until it's well combined. Step 4 is really easy. We mix our wet with our dry ingredients. Then just stir them all together and combine them until you no longer see any lumps. This is not going to take long at all. Step 5 is putting the mixture into the baking tin. And it's about 1/4 cup or so, about 60 milliliters worth. Now, if you make a mess, just clean it up on the sides because you don't want that to burn while it's baking in the oven. Step 6 is to bake it and then cool it. We're going to put this in the oven, and then you are going to bake these 16 to 22 minutes or until a toothpick inserted in the middle comes out clean. For those curious, around 98 degrees Celsius, 210 degrees Fahrenheit is a great baking temperature for most cakes. Let these cool in the pan for 5 to 10 minutes and then remove them to a wire rack and let them completely cool. While they are cooling, go ahead and soften that butter and cream cheese. It'll take about 45 minutes or so. Our step 7 is to make the frosting. We want softened butter that when we push against the sides of the bowl, it will spread easily like this. You can use a mixer and do this, but I'm going to do it by hand. Holding the bowl against your body will help you mix it a lot easier. Once the butter is really nicely smoothed out, we're going to add in that cream cheese. Don't add the cream cheese in too early or you can have lumps in your frosting and you don't want that. Do the same thing, press it against the sides of the bowl and keep mixing it until they're both well combined. Now we're going to add in some powdered sugar, up to a cup, but this is to taste. So just add a little bit at a time and taste it every so often. I personally only like to use about a quarter cup of powdered sugar, but I know other people like the full cup of powdered sugar or even beyond. I find for cream cheese frosting, using the back of a spoon is the easiest way to frost your cupcakes. Make sure they are cool before you start or they will just slide right off and onto the counter. Oh my goodness, these things smell so wonderful. I wish you guys were here. And they taste divine. This is one of my favorite things to eat, pumpkin. If I had to choose what I could only eat for the rest of my life, it may very well be pumpkin. So there you have it, my friends. Pumpkin cupcakes in 7 easy peasy steps. If you have any questions or just want to say hello, please leave a comment. I love to chat about your baking adventures. I sure hope you enjoyed our time together. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy baking.